Celebrating and Taking Charge of ADHD is an innovative group coaching program incorporating mindfulness as an essential tool throughout. This podcast addresses a number of topics that we face on a day-to-day basis and celebrates the precious human life we have all been given.
Welcome to the Celebrating ADHD podcast. I'm joined today with Bhante Paññāvamsa, who's actually in Sri Lanka at the moment, but is the abbot of the Dharma Centre in Colchester. He's been practicing mindfulness for many years, and he actually spent 6 years in a jungle near Burma. And he's also has a master's in cognitive science. So we're really privileged to have him to join us on this podcast to share his insights into mindfulness and how it can be of a benefit to ADHD. So welcome, Bhante.
Thank you for having me, Sue.
Thank you. So we're going to start with right speech. Perhaps you could explain what right speech is and why it's important.
Yes. Well, to quote the Buddha as a start to the topic, the Buddha says categorically, for a person who does not have right speech, that kind of a person will never experience a state of peace in life, right? The Buddha says this because often predominantly the way that we interact with the world is through speech. We make our opinions known, we communicate with family, with friends, with loved one, with every sort of engagement. We have this verbal engagement that we have in our lives with others. And this vocal engagement, or rather how we vocally engage with other people, sets the emotional state of the mind in accordance with the way our interactions go. So if a person was to say something to us and we might not be able to sort of respond in a right way or in a way that is fair by ourselves, we might feel that we've let ourselves down, right? But that is the point in right speech, where it is different from the other types of sort of secular speech patterns that we have. Here, the word right is there before speech. In Pali, we call this samma vacha. Now, what does samma mean? And samma, or right, which is the English translation, is what really makes it very much different. Samma speaks about speech and how it inclines the mind towards a state of enlightenment, a state of peace, a state of sustained happiness, right? That is how right speech is different from any other types of proposed ways of speech, because here, in right speech, you have a wholesome, a realistic attitude, which is aligned, or which aligns the mind rather, to a mind which can also attain to enlightenment. So we have the concept of wisdom now ingrained within the speech. And right speech in Buddhism is divided into 4 categories, which is, one is lying, musavada; sampapalapa, which is frivolous speech; sampapalapa; parusavacha, which is harmful speech or hurtful speech, how you would scold another person or speak ill of another person. And then we have pisunavacha, which is empty words that don't mean anything, words that do not carry weight, words that are not logical or irrelevant as well. So the Buddha says these 4 types of speech causes chaos in a person's life because a person's stability depends on the stability of relationships that a person has, right? That is why the Buddha is so strong on this aspect of right speech. And also, another point that we understand through the Buddha's teachings is, the Buddha says that the 5 precepts is a foundation of goodness within a society. But within this society, when people decide that they want to now work towards a state of enlightenment, a state of peace, from that day on, the person takes up the Ajiva Attamaka Sila, which are the 8 precepts, essentially. And those 3 additions to the 5 precepts is the Samma Vacha aspect, right? Or the right speech aspect, which is brought in to reinforce the attitude, communications, and the livelihood that the person entails by means of this verbal, good verbal practices or wholesome verbal practices. So that is Samavacha.
Thank you. So what I'm hearing is the reason why it's so important is because right speech causes stability in ourselves and also our relationships, and goodness in society. So it constitutes to a wholesome and realistic attitude. And you're saying that there's 4 elements of right speech. 1, lying. 2nd is frivolous speech, like gossip, talking about other people when they're not there. 3, harmful speech, speaking ill will of somebody. And empty words, so words, using words that are not logical and empty, not meaningless. Is that right?
Yes, that is correct. Yes. Yes, and you find that when a person goes or has this commitment of discipline, to discipline one's verbal outpour, you essentially change, in science, we change the cognitive processes of the brain itself following this commitment to right speech. Now, if you do not have anything good to say, you don't say anything. If you do not speak, if you see a fault in another person and complaining about it to a person who has nothing to do with that person, or which will only bring harm to this other person that you're going to speak about, you don't say it. And in the second phase of the course of discipline is you start learning to speak in a way that is ethical and that will not bring harm to your life and relationships. Because if we know anything is, people judge us for what we say. It happens, right? And more than, yes, we can take that, but something that is far more important is the mind works according to the context that we give it, right? So right speech would harm the way the mind works, or bring the mind to work in a way that is rather toxic to ourselves, our peace, the attitudes that we have in life, and the outlook that we have to life.
Yeah, thank you. I'd like to pick up on the word toxic, because in terms of ADHD and relating it to my own life and actually relationship with myself, I did find that I was using toxic words internally, like I'm good enough, and complaining, blaming others all the time as defense mechanisms as a way to survive. And I realize now that doesn't work, because you just avoid responsibility for taking on what your role is in choosing the words. So how would you advise someone who hasn't heard of right speech before and has ADHD? How would you advise them on going about learning right speech?
I would advise them to go into themselves in a way. And what I mean is not just sitting down and sort of contemplating, because that would be a rather challenging process. But what the Buddha would say, or what the practice speaks, is take yourself as an example. Always take yourself as an example. The Pali word is attanang upamankatva. Having taken yourself as an example, you see, would I like to receive this verbal abuse? If I wouldn't like to receive it, if I wouldn't like to be spoken to in this way, if I do not enjoy hearing that someone has spoken behind my back, a good friend, then why would I do it to another? Connecting with yourself. And that is a part that I really love about the precepts. It's not about the outside world. It is about how much we respect ourselves. Because if we know anything, is what you put out comes back to you. You pollute the waters, you eat the fish from the waters. Those plastic comes back into your body. You pollute the environment, it's going to come back to you. In every case, you find that what you put out comes back to you. If you are acting in a way, if you speak ill of people, it only takes a moment for people to realize that you are not a person to be trusted, right? So then it then makes you or your relationship suffer. The organic, authentic relationships that we could have with people suffers. Right. So the Buddha would say, take yourself as an example. Do you respect yourself enough to not put that toxicity into your living environment?
Thank you for that analogy. So what we put out is what we get back. So are you saying that all relationships start with the relationship with yourself? Is there a link?
Well, to a certain extent, because when we are small, when we are very young, we don't really decide on our relationships, do we? But as we grow and we take on friendships and we take responsibility in the relationships that we build, then we start making our decisions as to who we associate and all of that. But sometimes even growing and becoming an adult, you find that sometimes you don't have sway in the relationships or the choice of the relationships that you keep. You find that happening in a lot of abusive homes. You find that happening in very cultural, traditional homes where you'll be forced to sort of have relationships with people, and not just partnerships or romantic relationships, but even just sort of friendships with people for different gains that might come out of it. We find these things in society. But essentially, if, something that we always hear, because Sue, you might have heard of the word Kalyana Mitras, right? Good friends. And people always complain and people always say, where are the good friends? I don't know where are the good friends. My friends want to take me out for a drink all the time, or they speak behind my back, or they are not dependable. But then we question ourselves and we ask ourselves, have I been a good friend? Have I been authentic? Have I shown my true self? Have I shown to the people who are closest to me that I am vulnerable, that I might need support? Or have I been putting out a facade to show that I am strong, I am powerful, I do not need your support? Now that is a position, and we might think that we are really good actors and actresses and people, with very good theatrical skills. But people feel your vibrations far more than you can imagine. People feel your vibrations and know that other people are going through the same human experience as you and I are. Right? They know They know that they feel the human experience and they feel your vibration. So if you are inauthentic, if you feel a sense of fear of showing yourself, people sense this far more than we can imagine. Right? And that is how our relationships suffer. That is how we do not find good friends who will be truly supportive.
Oh, wow. So what I've got is that if you're inauthentic and you're putting on this facade saying you know we've got it all together, then that's kind of what people feel, and then all your relationships are going to be inauthentic. And I can, absolutely, as you said those words, I really could relate to that in my own life, where, because not knowing, I guess, when I was younger, that I was thinking differently and didn't want to appear stupid or not knowing, I created this persona or this personality that really kind of, you know, just studied people and wanted to say that I'm independent, I can do it all on my own and I don't need anybody, and I kind of just shut everyone out of my life. And by doing that, then I lacked intimacy within the relationship with others, and it's been lonely. And I haven't been showing up with others to express how I feel. I would just do everything to please them, even though I was perhaps upset or feeling, you know, sad about what they did or an action they did, but I wouldn't ever share it with them, so they would never get a chance to apologize or actually get some own realization on their actions, and for the relationship to grow. So that's been really useful, and a lot of it is about fear. It's fear of rejection. Don't want to upset people, don't want to bring conflict. Conflict can be used as a resource to grow the relationship. What are your thoughts on conflict in right speech?
Well, a lot of the problems that I have had myself, and I've seen with all the students and friends and all of that, is we are very aggressive. We find ourselves shifting from one extreme of the spectrum to the other extreme of the spectrum, unable to find and gravitate towards a proper balance in the spectrum, right? We want to be either that or this. We find ourselves hung up on that title, that sort of status title. Where am I at this moment? That we struggle with coming into a balance that we have essentially not experienced ourselves, right? So with conflict also arises the sense of the openness of mind and the communication aspect. How do we communicate, and do we communicate correctly? We often imagine ourselves, if it is something to do with a friend, we hope and imagine that the person should understand before we voiced our concerns or voiced our positions. But the thing is, it is not that person's duty, or that person's world does not revolve around your emotional state. That person has their own world, their own ego cycles, their own electromagnetic field around them, which they focus on, and we have our own thing.
So are you?
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt. Yeah. To clarify, are you saying that we're not responsible for someone else's response?
Well, we are definitely not responsible for another person's response. Can we say that we are responsible? Sometimes there would even be doubt whether we can take responsibility for our own response. I mean, take, for example, a person who's going through a severe ADHD episode. That person will not know how that person is going to respond. It'll happen so fast in that person. A person going through a panic attack episode or an anxiety episode, these people do not know, or it might happen so fast that even that person does not know that it's happening. A person who has a very short temper often does not logically, critically think about the results of their actions. That is what hate, lust, and delusion does to mankind. And this was spoken about after the Buddha. Of course, it was spoken about even in Jungian psychology, right? Because our ego centers take that moment of emotion so seriously because of the inclinations of ego now into the conversation that we forget everything else, right? We forget everything else. This is a state of mind, and that is exactly why meditation, mindfulness, awareness building is so important in society today. Do we really know what we want? Because we are so fast paced. I mean, if you're living in London, the world in London is so fast that you just run and run and run and run and run. And finally, maybe when you get sick, or maybe when something really drastic happens, you stop and you're like, my gosh, what have I been doing? You know, it happens so fast.
Yeah, absolutely. It does happen so quick. And then we're in this state of bewilderment to think, oh, how did that happen? You know, I didn't want the intention to be as it came out. And I think in terms of right speech, it's kind of organizing the words and having the time to communicate effectively. Sometimes we talk a lot to fill the space, but some of it is irrelevant.
Yeah, most of the time it might be relevant or harming. What the Buddha gives us a scale, actually, a sort of a tool, and the tool is this: will my words harm another person? Will my words harm me? Will my words harm another person and me? If any of these ticks are present, or if you can tick any of these boxes, be quiet.
Excellent. Great tool.
Right?
Thank you.
For those people who would be ticking the boxes all the time, then you need to know, okay, there needs to be an attitudinal change, right? If we see a person, look, human nature, we are by nature flawed, right? We are by nature flawed. It is greed, hatred, delusion. These are parts and parcels of any person's life. And, you know, if we would lie for certain things that we want to get, if we know the weaknesses that we have, then you know that those same weaknesses exist in the outside world. And if a person lies to protect one's reputation, if a person lies to get something, yes, the person is blameworthy. However, can we expect a human who is flawed to operate as in a scope of perfectionism, or operate from a scope of saintliness? We can't. We can't expect people to not make mistakes. We can't expect people to not do wrong. People will do wrong.
Yeah, it's inevitable, isn't it? That, you're not going to please everybody. And
yes,
we may say something that would upset another person. The key thing is to understand and investigate what that was, so you don't make the same mistake twice. Look at the consequences.
That is a good approach, but this is also there, because sometimes when we ask people to investigate, people again tend to go into a state of extremism with investigation, right? They try to find the answers for something from the outside world, right? And they reject, they keep themselves from a state of peace without the answer. Remember, sometimes people do things and there is no answer to those things that they do. They just did them. Right? Like when a person has a short temper, it has nothing to do with you, but the person comes home and he or she or the person might, take it out on you. There is no logical answer to that fight that you had. And that's all right. We have to question, who am I trying to please? Is it my ego? Because if it is the ego, then the ego will always try to make it far more weighty than it actually is.
So right. You're saying that it actually distorts the situation and proliferates and makes it bigger in terms of what it was. No, I can definitely relate to that. Well, look, we're coming to the end of the interview. There's one thing that I would like to understand is that there's 3 traits that have been identified by scientists being prevalent with ADHD: impulsivity, risk-taking, and constant novelty seeking. How can mindfulness help with those?
Yes. So with mindfulness brings a state of the current state of mind, or the person's mind, to settle upon the present moment. When we take experiences or the need of a person to constantly experience something which is novel, what essentially is happening in that process is that the person is living in the future. And he's comparing what he does not have with what he has. Then needing something which is novel again and again to satisfy himself. This, with or without ADHD, people do a lot, right? People do a lot. What mindfulness does is it brings you to the present and makes visible to you what the present experience is. And when you go into the present experience, you realize that it is not the same as a second ago. There is something novel in that present moment. But the thing is, are we seeing it is a question. The fight that you had a week ago is different from the fight that you are having right now. It's different. The emotions are different. The state of minds are different. But I might think, when I do not meditate or when I'm not open to this present moment experience or living in the present, I might imagine, oh, it's the same thing every week. It's not the same thing every week. It's different. Am I able to see that difference? The trees outside, the weather is different every day, especially in the UK. The weather is different every day. But I would compare and I would say, oh no, it's the same every day. It's not. It really isn't. There is difference, there's change, there's novelty in every passing moment. Mindfulness allows you to be with that novelty. The childlike mind is a term that we use. The intrigue that a child has, the inquisitiveness, the fresh outlook that the child has is something that can be cultivated with a person who is in love with this present, to motivate oneself to be in the present and live life which the person has, and not wander and yearn for the life that is coming tomorrow.
Okay, so it's about being in the present moment, and that there's seeing clearly that there's novelty in every moment. Every breath is different. Every day is different. So what most people find it hard to do is, in order to get to that state of mind, meditation is essential.
Yes.
And sometimes we think that we haven't got time. I haven't got time to do it. I'm not a monk. I can't live in a monastery. I've got to go out there. I've got to earn money. I've got to do this. I've got to do that. And I can't sit in a meditative posture to practice. What would you say to people to develop the skill of mindfulness?
I would say, start with this very moment. Start right now. Do not put it off. And as long as you have a consciousness, you can meditate. You don't even need to sit down. And especially with people who have been diagnosed with conditions such as ADHD, would know it is very difficult to sit down and be in one place. You want to move, you want to change your posture, right? So then what could you do? Take the daily chores that one would be doing. Walk into work, making your cup of coffee, arranging your bed, tidying up your bed. All of these things that you would do. You could start by simply doing these things with mindfulness and awareness. With mindfulness and awareness. And being in that moment, being with that thing that you are doing at that moment is a good way to start, right? And especially when you're sitting down, enjoying your cup of coffee or your cup of tea in the morning, and you sit down and enjoy the cup of tea or coffee in the morning, right? These are things, there are people out there who can't taste, and they hate themselves for it, right? They can't taste. They don't have sense perception in their tongues, right? And we do, and people who do have them do not taste. It doesn't make any sense. You have your taste buds, but you're not really, giving it the value that it should be given. Right? There are people who would do anything for another hour, another 2 hours, for another day to live. Especially Corona, we have so many examples. Beautiful lives who would tell, I wish I had another day because I'm not sort of, spoken to my loved ones or whatever, who would love to live. And what are we doing? We are constantly dying to live. We are dying to live in the, that's a book, actually, a lovely book if anyone wants to read it, Dying to Live. And that, essentially, I think I need to have my job, I need to be busy to live, but really we don't. We don't need any of these things to enjoy life, but you choose to do it. But if you do choose to do it well with awareness. Embrace that life. Embrace the present moment. And you could very well start with the chores that you have, the things that you do daily, walking to the tube station, whatever it is that you do. You could And for ADHD specifically, there are certain games that you can do. If you're sort of playing with your child, there are sort of mindfulness games that you could research on, where you throw about the ball or whatever game that you're doing with awareness there, right? And you find yourself slowly coming into a better state of awareness, a better state of calm, and a better state of connectedness in an intimate manner with your life.
Wow. Thank you very much, Bhante. So there we have it. So for anyone listening out there, the advice is to start now and to practice with daily chores and be in the present moment. And once we can accept what's going on in the present moment, we will start to see that everything's changing constantly, and enjoy the coffee when we drink it in the morning, and taste the coffee in the morning, and start to live life to the full. So thank you very much, Bhante, for those wise, compassionate insight into right speech and how mindfulness can help reduce the symptoms of impulsivity, risk-taking, constant novelty-seeking, to live a more fulfilled life.
Thank you so much for having me. It has been a pleasure sharing and having this discussion with you. So,
thank you for downloading. You've been listening to the Celebrating ADHD podcast, empowering people to reach their full potential. Please follow us on the Celebrating ADHD Facebook page, Instagram and Twitter, or join the members area at www.celebratingadhd.com. We are already good enough the way we are. Celebrating ADHD works best combined as a holistic treatment program, so we advise you to consult your health specialist for medical advice. If you are not sure if you have ADHD, please get in touch, as we can recommend a medical expert, as the diagnosis is all part of the journey.